One thing I always like to kind of say when you look at all these different jobs I've had, when my mom and dad, they both passed away 10, 15 years ago, but when they were both alive, my mom would look at all these jobs I've had in my life and say, you know, that Charles was a well-rounded young man. And my dad would always say, you know, that boy just can't keep a job. And I always feel like that's kind of the difference between moms and dads' outlook on things as well. So, and the truth is a little where in the middle there somewhere, so too. But it's really thankful to be here today. Thank you all so much for inviting me, and I look forward to sharing some stories with you today. My journey really begins in a little town on the eastern shore of Virginia, actually. Anybody know where the eastern shore of Virginia is? Maybe you've heard of Chincoteague. A lot of people have heard of Chincoteague. That's where the ponies are, right? Well, so I lived in a little town called Only, which is about 20 minutes south of the ponies. It's across the bay from Virginia Beach, across the Chesapeake Bay. It's a little peninsula, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place to grow up and to live. I had 500 people in my town, and there's still 500 people in that town. There's about probably 100 of them the same. Some of my friends still live there, but the town had a railroad tracks that ran right down the middle. And there was a Methodist church on one side and a Baptist church on the other side. We happened to live on the Methodist side of the tracks. So that's how we became Methodists. My mom actually grew up in that town, and my grandmother grew up in that town as well, and lots of other relatives. And so we walked to the Methodist church every Sunday morning, right around the corner. And I've had the honor to go back there many times over the years and preach a couple times and do funerals and things for friends. And so it's a great, great place that we really love and love to go back. And it was a typical, small town upbringing in the 1960s. We did Sunday. We called it Sunday school at 10 o'clock, and preaching is what we called the worship service. And Sunday school and preaching. And we always say, we going to Sunday school and preaching today, or just preaching, kind of thing. And we would walk to church, and we had vacation Bible school and all those things. But as a little boy, just kind of going through the motions, really, honestly. And then I was in school, and I went to a private school called Broadwater Academy, and the school was, it was not a Christian or religious private school, just a private school. And back in those days, you could kind of get away with teaching, being Christian in the school. And I'll never forget, I had a fourth grade teacher whose name was Mrs. Cynthia Carmen. And she was really the first person, this first lady, that, and I meant to say in the beginning here, that my life has been loaded with ladies who have been lifting me up. So this is really perfect. I'm going to talk a lot about the ladies that have touched me in my life. And I'm not doing this because this is the group. This is just how it happened as I reflected. But Mrs. Carmen was this great Christian lady, and she had a Bible on her desk in the classroom. She would play records for us from this young Christian couple that had a children's puppet ministry out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And they had these, I still remember some of the songs, and some of you may have heard of them since then. They became famous, and then they became infamous. But back in the late 1960s, they were just a real couple of gentle souls that were doing children's ministry. Their names were Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. You remember those names? Lauren, you don't remember those names. I'll fill you in later. But anyway, so she played these records for Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, and then she just showed Christian principles as a teacher. And there's a story that happened that I remember to this day. Well, matter of fact, I brought some Bibles, and these Bibles kind of tell the story of my life as well. This was my first Bible when I was a little boy. I got it on my 5th birthday, I think. And in the back of it, I found this. Actually, my mom and dad gave this to me in Christmas of 1966. And in the back, Mrs. Carmen had led us in the salvation prayer on December 20th, 1968. I have the words saved. December 20th, 1968, written in the back of this Bible. Mrs. Carmen led us in that. But one day, we had to learn the multiplication tables in 4th grade. And I was really good at them until we got to the sevens, and for some reason the sevens stumped me. And the deal was, if you didn't pass the quiz on the multiplication tables for that day, you couldn't go out for recess. You had to stay in and study. Well, we were engaged in this really, really important kickball match with the 5th grade. And so I kept missing the event, right? So I thought, I can't get through these sevens. There's only one way I'm going to be able to do this. So I wrote down all the multiplication tables for the sevens and put them on the floor beside my desk. What's a 4th grade boy going to do, right? I mean, that's the natural thing. Well, got to remember also, I didn't mention, there's only 11 kids in this class, right? So a very small classroom. But Mrs. Carmen did not see it. So I, riding along, wrote my stuff, looked down, and turned the paper in. She didn't say anything. I'm golden. This is good. Time for recess. We get in line. I had noticed that my best friend who sat behind me, Dixie Scott, had gone up and talked to her about something, but I didn't know what he was talking to her about. Well, we're in line, and she says, Charles, can you wait back for a moment? So they all about to play, and I walk up to the desk, and she says that famous line that we as parents many times said, as teachers we've said it as well, is there something you'd like to tell me? And I knew in this moment, this was a moment that I had a choice. And I told her, Mrs. Carmen, I had a paper on the floor by my desk. I cheated. Expecting the full wrath of her, you know what she said? And I'll never forget it. She said, Charles, the devil was sitting on your shoulder today. Don't ever do it again. Now go outside and play. It was like, changed me in that moment. That she had forgiven me and redeemed me in that moment. Never forgotten it. So, I got to be 14, 15, 16, and started to find out about, as I say, beer and girls. And church did not seem as important to me anymore. And we didn't have a very vibrant youth group. And so I kind of started going a bit wayward. And I got a little bit more wayward and a little bit more wayward. I graduated high school. I went to the University of Richmond, became a Richmond Spider. And at some point early in that time, I joined a fraternity. And then I had a car accident. And that night, I had the car accident. I got a fraternity nickname, and my nickname was, do you remember my nickname, Jill? Crash Parker. In fact, it became such a nickname that everybody called me that. And, you know, a name like that, when you're in a fraternity and you're kind of a party boy anyway, you start to live up to the nickname. And I got even more of a party guy, and more of a party guy. And alcohol became a real struggle for me. I started missing classes. I started not doing the things I needed to do. I had been appointed to the college honor council. I left that because I decided I'd rather be the party guy than the honor council guy. I was making poor choices. At that time also, my parents moved from Virginia to Cocoa Beach, Florida, because my dad got a big job at Kennedy Space Center. Matter of fact, they moved right near Jill's parents a few years later. That's how we ended up meeting each other. But, so I went down to visit them. I was studying journalism. I was going to be the next Woodward and Bernstein. If you remember those guys from the 1970s, I was going to go to D.C. and be an investigative political reporter. That was going to be what I was going to do. I came down to visit them in Cocoa Beach, and they got a house on the golf course in Cocoa Beach at 75 degrees and breezy, and it was 30 degrees in Virginia, and I went, I know where I'm going, and I moved to Florida. And I want to tell you, I don't know if any of y'all were around Cocoa Beach in the 80s, but it wasn't a very good place for a guy named Crash who liked to drink. And things got even worse. But I did fell in love with a lady named Barbie, and we got married. Settled down a bit, but really didn't settle down too much. Kept drinking, had dabbled in some drugs, things weren't going so great. She had a daughter who became my stepdaughter, and then we had my son Zach. I'll tell you a little bit about it later. But things really went south in the, let's see, it was probably 1994, 93, 94. And she left, she moved out, and we ended up divorcing. And now I was divorced, living by myself, and the partying got really out of hand. So one day I missed work for a couple of days. I was working in an aerospace engineering firm, and I missed work a couple of days. And a buddy from mine from work called me and said, "Hey, what's going on?" I said, "I got the flu." He goes, "You haven't got the flu. You got a problem, and you need to do something about it." And this was about 6 o'clock in the evening. I'd already started having some drinks that day. So I said, what do I do? I don't know what to do. "You're right." He said, "You need to go to a treatment center." I didn't know what that was or what to do. And back in those days, he said, "Well, look it up in the yellow pages." So I looked it up in the yellow pages, and there was a treatment center down by Holmes Regional Medical Center down in Melbourne. I called them, and they said, "We've got a spot for you." So then I had to figure out how to get there because I'd been drinking. So I called a cab. And the cab said, "It's going to be about $40 for us to take you down to Melbourne." Well, back I had money, but I didn't carry much cash on me in those days because I would spend it on drinks. So I had $20. I said, "I tell you what, I'll give you $20 and I'll write a check for $20. He goes, "You think I'm going to take some guy to an alcohol treatment center and take their check?" So here's what I did. Some of you more experienced people in the room will remember these days. So I went in my house and grabbed my VCR, which back in those days were worth about $100. And I unhooked it and took it out to the guy and said, "Here's the check for $20, here's my VCR. If the check doesn't clear, the VCR is yours. If it does, when I get out of this place, I'll come and get it." He goes, "Deal." So he threw my VCR in the trunk. I went back in the house, made the biggest gin and tonic I could make because I knew it was going to be the last one I had. And I drove to the treatment center with him. And that was the next day was March 1st, 1994, the day I stopped drinking, and haven't had a drop since. Praise God. So it always becomes an applause line. I don't mean it, but it's a milestone day for me. So I went to AA, I did all those things, but there was still something missing. And one day, here's the next lady in my life. One day, this lady who lived next door to me, named Zella Vaughn, walked over and said, "Hey, would you like to go to church with me tomorrow?" And I said, "I'd love to do that." So Zella and I went to Grace United Methodist Church in Merritt Island. The pastor there was Dave Baldridge, and his wife Sarah was his wife. I know that you're old friends of theirs. And it was like I had come home. It was a beautiful day. The liturgy of the Methodist Church, I remembered as a child. I remember the Apostles' Creed. I remember the hymns they sang that day. I just was like overwhelmed. And so I felt like, okay, this is the part of my life I'm missing right now. I quit drinking. It's been a few months, but there was something still missing, and that was it. So she went to the 11 o'clock service. They had an earlier service. I said, "Well, I'll tell you, next week I'm going to go to an early service." And I went to the early service and went to it. It was great. And then I was outside by the fellowship hall, and there was this lady standing there. I didn't know her or anything, and she just randomly said to me, "Hey, would you like to come to a Sunday school class?" A random moment in life that if I had said no, who knows what would have happened, but I said yes. And I went to the Sunday school class, and it was taught by Sarah Baldridge, the pastor's wife. And I went into this room, and I felt like a fish out of water. I want to tell you, I felt like, everybody knew everything. I didn't know anything. They were going to start studying 1 Samuel. I had no idea what was going on, right? So they talked about 1 Samuel and stuff, and I'm just, a couple of the stories they talked about, I kind of remember, but still. So that afternoon, I went to the old Barnes & Noble in Merritt Island. Actually, I forgot one Bible I was going to tell you about. This Bible right here. Anybody remember the Living Bible? I forgot to mention this one. when I was in the treatment center, I asked my wife to bring this to me in the treatment center. I did start reading the Bible in the treatment center, but I hadn't started going to church. This was from my grandmother, who lived in Bloomington, North Carolina. She gave it to me in 1973, my 14th birthday. And a quick story about her. We were talking about, who was talking about Presbyterian earlier? Yeah. So my grandmother, her middle name is Cuthbertson, but they had moved from Asheville to Wilmington in the early days of World War II with my grandfather, my grandmother, and my dad and his 5 sisters. They were all little. And one time later in life, I asked my grandmother, I said, with a name like Cuthbertson, how come you guys aren't Presbyterian? You've been going to this Baptist church all your lives. And she said, oh, I was Presbyterian for years when we moved to Wilmington. I had these 5 little kids, and the Baptist church was right down the street. The Presbyterian church was across town, so we became Baptists. So that's that one. But anyway, so when I joined Grace, I went to the Sunday school class. I went to Barnes & Noble, and I bought a new Bible, which is this one, and I bought a concordance and a Bible dictionary and a Bible and all this stuff because I wanted to study this First Samuel, so I knew it, because I figured everybody in the room knew what was going on. I wanted to find out too. Well, of course, we had a lot of people didn't know what was going on, but I was real quiet the first few times in the Sunday school class. I'd share a little bit along the way, but not too much. But I really was getting into learning the Bible and learning all this stuff and expanding my faith. And about 3 to 4 months in, I think it was, one day, Sarah Baldridge, the teacher, at the beginning of class, said, Charles, after class, could you stay back for a couple of minutes? And I thought to myself, uh-oh, somebody has told Sarah of my background. They have found out that I was this horrible, drinking, drugging guy in Cocoa Beach named Crash, and I guess my time here is done. That's the first thing I thought. So I waited after class. The whole class, I'm sitting there going, okay, well, I'm kicked out of this. We'll find out what's next for life. And class leaves. I come over to Sarah, and I said, Sarah, what's up? And she said, you know, I've noticed that you really have latched onto this stuff and really understand it and everything. And you know, I'm going to be out of town in a couple of weeks. Would you teach the class? And I said, Sarah, I've got a few things I need to tell you. And I laid my heart out to Sarah about everything about my life that was horrible, the things I had done. And she sat there patiently and smiled and patiently and smiled. And I finished, and she said, okay, that's all great. Now, will you teach the class next week? And I thought again, redemption, forgiveness, acceptance, right? And please, while we're talking about Sarah Baldridge, if you could keep her in your prayers and the whole Baldridge family. Sarah is very sick. They retired from ministry, and they live in Kentucky, but they're over on the West Coast, and she's very sick, so if you keep her in your prayers, Sarah Baldridge. I really appreciate it. A very special person in my life, she and her husband. But anyway, so I was one of those guys at Grace that was like there every time the door opened. You know those people, right? I was doing men's ministry, I was doing education, I was doing this, I was on the finance committee, I was doing all the different things. And one morning after a men's Bible study that I led, I just felt the Spirit come over me. I was thinking, and all of a sudden I just felt like, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I think God is calling me to be a minister. And this is this is 2 years after I had these years of just being this crazy guy. And so I went to Pastor Dave afterwards and said, can we go to your office and talk? And we went and we talked. And when I told him that I thought I was being called to ministry, I figured he'd kind of go, oh, all right, well, we need to, He got up and walked across the room and hugged me and said, let's see what we have to do. And that was so I quit drinking in 1994. That was in 1996. And by 1998, I was in the pulpit of Georgia United Methodist Church. Miraculous. Only God could have done that in those 4 years. The first time I preached, I pulled this Bible off my shelf today. I just wanted to show you, this is really cute. The first time I preached at Grace, this sticky note was on the pulpit. My son Zach was 6. I don't know if you can see that. It says, "Hi, Dad." And he put that sticky note on the pulpit before I preached for the very first time. I thought that was really cool. But anyway, so we've got us up to being a pastor now. And pastoral ministry, the way the United Methodist Church works, you can either kind of become a pastor in 2 ways. You either go to seminary and go through all the seminary stuff and become ordained, or you can become what's called a licensed local pastor, where you go through a lot of interviews and some other kind of schooling, and then they appoint you to kind of a small church, if you will, and then there's other, you can either do seminary or other things while you're a pastor. And so that's what they did for me, because they needed somebody at Georgiana in South Merritt Island, and also my son Zach was little, and I had said I was not going to move away, because his mom lives in Merritt Island, and I was like, I'm not moving away from my son to be a minister. I'm going to stay here, so if you want me, then it's got to be local. And so Georgiana was available, so they appointed me to Georgiana. And Georgiana had been pastored for about 20-something years by a guy named Ned Keller. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Ned Keller, but he had been the part-time pastor there for many years. I was the first full-time pastor they were going to have in many, 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 many years. And in Methodist Church also, they provide a house for you. And Georgiana had never had a house because Ned had his own house because he was only part-time. So they bought a house. So now they had bought this house for this new minister that was coming in. And I'll never forget, the first time I went to the church to visit, there was this really sweet lady, well, somewhat sweet lady. Since it's on YouTube, I probably won't say her name. But anyway, the first time I met a few people at the church, she kind of sidled over to me, and speaking of serious, she was a former CIA officer, so she was pretty tough, but she was like this tall. And I walked over and I was talking to her, and she goes like this. So I bent down and real quietly, she said, "Just want to let you know, we bought this house for you that's right next door to this church. We expect you to grow this church and get more offerings to pay for this house. That's our expectation." I'm like, "Oh, no pressure." Okay. She was a sweet lady, though. We got along great after that. But anyway, so as I said, I wasn't an ordained minister at this point. Well, I don't know if some people don't know a lot of these kind of intricacies, but when you see a minister who's got a robe on and they have that stole around their neck, that stole, that signifies ordination. So I was not supposed to wear a stole. I was just had the black robe. Well, so I started on a Monday in early June of 1998, and first service was going to be the following Sunday, and I'm kind of fiddling my way through this, not really even know what I'm supposed to be doing. And the lay leader of the church shows up, like on Wednesday, and he says, "Oh, Charles, just want to let you know, on Sunday, the United Methodist women have bought a stole for you, and they're going to present it to you at the worship service for you to wear." Yeah. And of course, I knew that I wasn't supposed to wear the stole, but they didn't know that. But now I've got a quandary, this theological quandary, right? So I called my boss, the district superintendent, this man who had been in ministry for years and years, named Ray Finkley. He was this grandfatherly man with this deep voice. I called him and said, "Dr. Finkley, I've got a problem." He goes, "Charles, you've been in there 3 days. How do you already have a problem?" I said, "Dr. Finkley, the United Methodist women have bought me a stole. I don't know what to do." He goes, "Charles, it's your first Sunday. If the Methodist women want you to wear a stole, wear the stole." So I did. Learned a good lesson there, right? We know who runs the church. The ladies run the church. So I had great years of ministry at Georgiana. We were there for 6 years. Just to give you a few stories about some different parts of ministry that I really found interesting and comforting and fun and touching. I was a preacher of what I call a preacher of the lectionary. Many pastors decide what what scripture they're going to use for a variety of reasons, variety of ways. But there's a thing called a lectionary and I think the Lutheran Church uses the lectionary, right? And so it gives you the scriptures each week. So I decided that's what I was going to do. So I was a lectionary preacher. And in sermon prep, it's really interesting. I would try to prep the thing throughout the week. And then there'd be many times, like on Thursday or Friday, I'd go, something's just not right. Something's just not right. It's just not, I don't feel it right in my spirit. And I'd get up early Sunday morning and completely change it. And those were always the ones that most people said were the best ones. And I really feel it's like because the Spirit of God was really like, okay, God, you got to give me the word now because I got people coming in 2 hours, right? So that was one thing that I really enjoyed doing. Worship, I loved worship time. Our church in those days, we started off, it's a small, I don't know if you're familiar with Georgiana, but back in those days it was just a small old chapel. The chapel was built in 1888, still had the same pews in it from the 1880s. And we had about 75 people that were there on between 2 services on Sunday morning. I say this with some pride and some blessings from God, we had about 300 in attendance by the time I left in 6 years. So I was really pleased and felt like we did great ministry there in those years. We were the fastest growing by percentage Methodist church in the state of Florida in those years. So I'm really, really happy about that. But loved our worship time. We had a great choir director named June Reed, who's still around. She goes to church with me now at Grace, actually, and where we attend now. And one funny story. We had what Methodists call Holy Communion every Sunday, and originally we had it once a month on the first Sunday of the month, I think. But then we started doing it every week. But I got 2 stories. One I don't have written down, but this one with June. I eventually started going to seminary while I was a pastor, and so I was learning all these different things about worship and different things to do. And one time, this seminary professor talked about how Holy Communion is modeled after the Last Supper, and it's a family time, and that instead of being all solemn and all quiet and reverent, we ought to be like it's a family dinner. And we ought to really enjoy each other's company during communion. So I decided one Sunday, okay, everybody, now imagine yourself sitting in a church that you had the solemn communion all your life, and I'm the preacher's up there going, okay, everybody, today we're going to have communion. You come up whenever you want to get the bread and the juice, wander around, visit with each other, talk, enjoy each other's company, have some fun. We're going to play a little music, just do what you know, blah, 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 blah. So we did that. It was really great. June comes up to me afterwards. She goes, Charles, that was really fun. Don't ever do it again. And I didn't. Another time, communion story. This is great. There was a little boy in the back. He was about 8. It was the early service, and we had always done everybody come up and kneel and hand out everything. We decided to start doing it by intinction, where you dip the bread in the wine in the cup. In Methodist church, we use juice. Well, I explained to everybody, for 15 minutes, look, please, here's what we do. You come down, I'm going to give you some bread, you're going to dip it in the thing, you're going to take it, So I explained it several times. So, of course, 8-year-old little Stephen in the back wasn't listening, so he comes down, and I'm standing there with the bread, and June's with me, and she's got the juice, the chalice with the juice in it. Stephen comes and grabs the bread and immediately puts it in his mouth. Then he steps over and realizes that he doesn't have the bread to dip because he'd already put it in his mouth. So he sticks his finger in the juice, does that. June looks at me, I look at June, I'm like, just keep going, nobody saw it. So the rest of the people, got Stephen's finger germs in their juice, but anyway. Pastoral care, of course, is a huge part of ministry. And a lot of these things a lot of people don't see a lot of, on the backside of ministry. We see the preacher on Sunday morning doing the worship and doing the preaching and the corporate prayer and all that, but we don't see a lot of the things maybe. And so pastoral care was always a really special thing to me. And when I started, as I said, there was 75 attending, and so I really wanted to make a commitment to my folks that if you were in the hospital, I was going to visit you every day you were there. And as we grew, it got harder and harder, and I kept trying to keep that commitment as much as I could. And I'll never forget, we had this one young woman named Sandy who had a young family. She lived right down the street from the church, and she got ovarian cancer. And she was very sick, and then they moved her over to Florida Hospital in Orlando. And I was like, I've made this commitment, and I'm visiting people every day in the hospital. And so, and I'm not saying this to brag or anything, just so you kind of know sometimes what ministers do that you don't even know about it. My family didn't even, my kids didn't even know I did this. I would get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and drive over to Florida Hospital, get there around 5, visit with Sandy, pray, read some scripture, 15, 20 minutes, get in the car, head back home, be back home and take the kids to school. But to me, it was something that I felt that she needed, especially being over there, because it wasn't family, wasn't over there regularly, and so really important. And another guy whose name was Buzz, who was this older guy. You remember Buzz? He was this older guy who was just a charismatic guy, and he was at Cape Canaveral Hospital, very sick for a long time. And he was in one of those areas. I think he had, is it called MRSA, where you got to gown up to see them. I'd gown up every day, go in there for about 5 minutes, pray, ungown, and over and over. But the commitment that pastors do to do those things is so important. I think that personal touch. And so if the pastor's not doing those things, get on with it. I also had my Courtney Springs ladies, I call them. Courtney Springs is a assisted living. It's called Lennox now, I think, but back then it was called Courtney Springs. I had about 6 or 7 ladies that lived there, and so my secretary would book me one whole day every month, where I would just go from floor to floor to floor, to room to room to room, visiting my ladies at Courtney Springs. And I'd get back to the office, and my secretary would say, "How was your day?" And I'm like, "Well, I've had pound cake 8 times, so I'm good." But it was always special. It was just a special thing, I think, and people, really appreciated that pastoral touch of coming to visit them when they're shut-ins. So that's something I always really enjoyed about ministry as well. At Georgiana, we always did lots of weddings and funerals. It was a beautiful little chapel, and I could have done a wedding every weekend. I didn't, but I could have done weddings every weekend. But I wanted to tell you about my very first wedding. So the Labor Day weekend after I started in June, Labor Day weekend, a car went around the bend on the side of Tropical Trailer right by the church, going too fast, and ran off the road and ran into the church building. This is a building built in 1888 on a foundation of bricks, like brick pillars around the corners of the church. So the church was literally knocked off of the foundation. We quickly had church in a building down the street that we called Provost Hall that day, and we ended up having to be in Provost Hall throughout almost until Christmas time, because they had to fix the church. Well, I had a wedding scheduled, and sometime in September or October, and it was a young woman who her parents lived near there, and they weren't church members, but so we had to move the church to Grace Methodist, because we're friends with the people at Grace, so they said, "You can have the church there." Well, this particular bride had decided not decided, but she had a baby before she got married, which, whatever, right? So she had this newborn baby. So we had Grace, we got a full church, we got my organist with us there, and she's playing the music, and church organists, when they're doing a wedding, they bring enough music with them for the 4 or 5 songs as a prelude, and that's all they got. Well, so she's got her music she's playing until the wedding's going to start. I got the groomsmen lined up, and the gals are lined up too, but the bride is not out there yet. I'm like, "Where's the bride? What's going on?" I wander back. I go to the room where the bride's getting ready, and of course she had this beautiful wedding gown on that was like strapless kind of wedding gown. Well, the baby started going crazy. The baby was hungry, so she had to basically disrobe to be able to feed the baby before the ceremony. And so I went back to the church. I walked down the side aisle. Everybody's kind of looked at their watch. I leaned down to my organist and I said, "Keep playing. The bride's nursing the baby." And so she just kept playing. One funeral that I really remember, we had a lady named Alice who was a Arthur Murray dance studio teacher her whole life. And she was very much of a character, Miss Alice. And she passed away, and her daughter was a very good friend of mine, and they had a couple, her daughter had a couple of kids who were my kids' ages, and so we were going to have a funeral for Miss Alice. And Miss Alice, Leslie, her daughter, came to me and said, Charles, I got something a little crazy that I want to do. I hope you'll do it. I said, hey, we're pretty freewheeling here. What do you want to do? And she said, well, at the end of the service, I want you to walk over and, she goes, I've been to funerals before, and I notice how you kind of escort people out. There's somebody that's alone that hasn't had the death, you'll escort them. I said, yeah, she is. So I want you to come up and get me and bring me up like you're going to escort me out. And then we're going to hit the music, and you and I are going to lead the church in a conga line out of the church in honor of my mom being a dance instructor. And I said, I love it. So that's what we did. She got there beside me, the doors opened, the conga music came on, and we just started dancing right on out of the door, and everybody loved it. Now sometimes there's some unexpected things going to happen at funerals as well. And actually this was with a hospice chaplain. He was a hospice chaplain at Gustav Hospital, and he had he sang beautifully. And a lady who was my nursery worker, her husband died. And his name was Sid Blumenthal. Important for the story. So, and Sid was born Jewish and then had converted to Christianity. So when he was dying, this chaplain sang some psalms to him, and then also sang Amazing Grace. And so his wife asked if the chaplain could have a part of the service and sing these songs in the service. I said, sure. Well, we couldn't arrange it, so he was going to show up to the cemetery for the graveside part, and he was going to sing at that. So that was good. So we're at the graveside, and I'm standing. We're waiting for this guy, and all of a sudden he comes zooming up real quick. Everybody's there, we're assembled. I'm standing at one end of the casket is here. I'm standing over here, and this chaplain comes running up and stands at this side of the casket. So we're on opposite ends, right? So I do my part, and then I introduced him and said he was going to sing a couple songs and kind of told the story. And I think he's just going to sing. Well, he decides to start telling stories about the guy who had died. But he starts calling him Stan Blumenthal instead of Sid Blumenthal. I'm like, what's the worst thing you can do at a funeral is call the dead person the wrong name, right? I mean, there's not anything too much worse. But I'm over here, and there's nothing I can do to stop him. And he is saying Stan over and over and over again. And I'm like, this is getting worse and worse. I've got to do something. So I just kind of casually walked over, put my arm around him, and just leaned in to whisper, it's Sid. And he goes, and I'm pretty sure it was a lie. I never did find out if it was truth or not. He goes, oh, I'm so sorry. A buddy of mine named Stan Blumenthal recently died, and he's been on my heart, and so I just got his name confused. I'm like, you are such a liar. But anyway, then everybody felt sorry for him, and it was all fun. I did have the opportunity while I was a pastor to go to Asbury Theological Seminary. I started off doing a course of study, which was I would have to go to up to Candler and Emory in Atlanta for 2 weeks in the summer. That was the plan. Course of study in United Methodist Church, you go away for 2 weeks in the summer, you do the schooling, you do a bunch of schooling throughout the year. If you don't have access to a seminary. And a lot of these communities, small communities, if you're a pastor of a small church, there's not a seminary, people can't afford it, all that stuff. So I went up to Atlanta for one summer for a couple weeks. I got to go to Jimmy Carter's Sunday school class in Plains, Georgia, which was so cool. A group of us got in the car and drove from Atlanta to Plains one Sunday morning early. It was a really cool thing. I just want to share real quick because he taught a Sunday school class in the church. And they had the Sunday school class in there first, and then they had the worship service after. And he found out that there was 5 Methodist pastors in the back, so he kept kind of ribbing us. It was this little Plains Baptist church, and it was full of people. Buses, got a picture with him and Rosalind after, which was really, really cool. And he taught this really great Sunday school class. And then we stayed for worship. Most of those people left. They're tourists kind of thing. They come to the Sunday school class and leave. We stayed for worship, and which was a great, just small, it was about 50 people in there, the small Baptist church. And it was really cool because you're in there worshiping and listening, and all of a sudden you look over and there's Jimmy Carter's right there, you know, it's just really cool. But it ended up, Asbury Theological Seminary, which is out of Wilmore, Kentucky, which is a Methodist affiliated seminary, opened a campus in Orlando right when I was in ministry at Georgiana. It was perfect timing, God's timing. I was able to go to seminary. And so I would go over every Thursday and do 3 classes all day, and then study during the week, and then do my, then every week do these 3 classes. And I was able to go to seminary while I was a pastor. And it was really, really cool because I was one of the few people there that was a full-time pastor of a church, and so I was, really helpful, I think, to a lot of the people that were there, the students. And I have a great story about Asbury that I'm going to share, because I'm very proud of the fact that I have a Master's Divinity from Asbury Theological Seminary. At that time, the president of Asbury was a guy named Maxie Dunham. And he's a very famous writer. You could look him up. He's got lots of books. I think he may have passed away now, but he told us a story at our graduation, to kind of give us a charge to become, as we were becoming Methodist ministers. He said he was from Louisiana or Mississippi. But he was in Kentucky at Asbury. He was the president of Asbury in Kentucky. And he said that he and his wife would go to Mississippi for, to see family and holidays and things. He goes, and when we drove from Kentucky to Mississippi, we always stopped at the barbecue joint that had the most pickup trucks in the parking lot. We knew that was going to be the best barbecue. And so we walked into this one barbecue joint somewhere in North Mississippi somewhere, and you kind of walk up to the window to order and then sit down and they bring you your food. And so I walked up and the lady behind the counter said, where are y'all from? And he said, oh, we're from Wilmore, Kentucky. And the lady goes, oh, Wilmore, Kentucky? That's where Asbury Theological Seminary is. And he said, well, yes, it is. And he got ready to brag a little bit that he was the president, and his wife kind of gave him the elbow, like, don't tell him, see what she's going to say, So he said, yes, what do you know about Asbury Theological Seminary? She said, well, my husband and I have had barbecue restaurants all around the country. We travel all around the United States and start restaurants, and then we stay for a few years and then move somewhere else. And we love doing that. She goes, but every time we move to a different community, we find a Methodist church that has the pastor as a graduate of Asbury Theological Seminary. Because we know that Asbury Theological Seminary trains the best pastors. And I always, when he told us that, that really, told us that that's what our role is as a pastor. We're not just a preacher, we're not just a teacher, as you mentioned earlier. We have a responsibility to our congregations to be their pastor, to be their leader, to be their spiritual leader. And that was something that I always tried to take to heart. Ministry does have a lot of unexpected moments too. And one of those moments happened for me on 9/11, 2001. Who remembers that day? Well, it's a much different day for me to remember. We had a lady whose name was Hope, who was our lay leader in the church. And Hope had ovarian cancer. And Hope was very, very sick. And Hope was put under hospice care. She had been in the hospital, and she was home in a hospital bed. And I had been at her house on 9/10 all day with her and her husband and the people coming in and out, how that all is. I went home, I left about midnight. I lived not too far from where she lived, and went home about midnight to take a shower, try to get a few hours of shut-eye before I would go back the next day to be with her, so I would be with her when she passed. Got up early on the morning of 9/11, went to her house. She passed away just shortly before I got there. So I was there with her husband, and as I mentioned before, if you remember, I was going to be a journalism major, so I'm a news junkie. So here I am at her house. She is deceased in the hospital bed in the living room, where the TV is, but of course the TV was turned off. My role at that point became the guy standing at the front door of the house, stopping people from coming in who hadn't heard she had died or wanted to come pay respects because she was still there and we were waiting for the funeral home to come. One guy came up to me and said, "Hey, a plane hit a building in New York City." And I thought, oh, well, it was a banner plane or something. He didn't have much information at that point. He didn't really say much. Well, then people started, we started hearing things were happening. And so I'm about to go crazy because I can't turn on the TV. And of course, we didn't have cell phones back then that would tell us things. My wife, I had a pager, I think, even. Maybe I had a phone, a flip phone, but my wife was trying to get up with me to see about getting Zach out of school because they were pulling kids out of school. I'm there in this house. There's nothing I can do, waiting for the funeral home. I had already promised her husband, Greg, that I would go to the funeral home with him that afternoon to help him through that, which I did a lot with families. And I'd also told him that evening we'd go out to dinner to Bernard Surf in Cocoa Beach. So I had the whole day planned with her husband. And we get in the car, the funeral home finally came. I turn on the TV just in time to see towers starting to fall. I still have no idea what's going on. And that afternoon, I remember driving him to the funeral home. I'm trying to listen to the radio. He's talking to me and his sister about the funeral arrangements. I'm trying to find out. I literally did not find out what happened on 9/11 until about 9 o'clock that night. The devastation of what was going on until like 9 o'clock that night. And so 9/11 for me is the day that hope died. Pretty metaphoric there, think about it. But I also have a funny story that is related to that day as well. So a few months later, another church member passed away, Harriet Whitehurst, and she lived down the street from the church, and she wanted to be buried up in Georgia. And so she had asked me before she died, she goes, "Look, Pastor, we're going to have a service here, but I want to have a service up in Georgia too. Will you go up for that service?" I said, "Absolutely." And so this was like 2 or 3 months after 9/11. So the service is going to be up in Georgia on Saturday. She goes, "Look, we'll fly you up to Atlanta, you can rent a car, drive out to the service, do the service, drive back to the airport and fly home, same day," right? I said, "Cool, I'll do that." So it's a Saturday morning. I've got a briefcase with my Bible and my sermon for the service, and I'm wearing a suit. Now, how many people have you ever seen at Orlando Airport at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning in a suit, right? Nobody is doing that flying, right? Well, so I get on the plane, and there's people, I realize as we're starting to go, that people are starting to kind of look at me kind of weirdly, and even like chit-chatting about me. And you know how you feel like somebody's talking about you? I could really sense that they were talking about me. And I'm like looking around, so finally I leaned over to this guy and I said, "Excuse me, it appears to me that you people are talking about me. Can you tell me what's going on?" And the guy goes, "We know who you are." And I said, "I don't think you do, but who do you think I am?" He goes, "You're the air marshal." Back, we had air marshals on all the flights. They were wearing suits back then. They ended up starting not wearing suits, but so they thought I had a weapon in this briefcase. And I pulled out my Bible and I said, "This is the only weapon I've got, guys. I hope there's another one on here." So that was a lot of fun. Now this little story I'm going to tell right now. How much more time do I have? A few minutes? Okay. This story is one that I hope I can get through, and I think somebody probably knows what I'm going to talk about here now, but it is the church as the true body of Christ. So, a couple months after 9/11, on October 25th, 2001, my family experienced a really tragic time. My wife was pregnant with twin little boys. And it was a very difficult pregnancy for her. Zach, my oldest, was at that time 11, and then we had Jake, who was 2.5, and my wife was pregnant with these twin boys. And one morning, on a Thursday morning, I was getting ready to go to seminary. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little earlier than that, and she was 32 weeks. And she didn't feel good. We had been to the doctor several times that week, and it even asked the doctor to put her in the hospital for a couple of days because she was very dehydrated, just felt crappy. And he kept saying, look, it's a twin pregnancy, they're difficult, you know. And she actually had some her blood pressure was normal, but she didn't have normal blood pressure. She normally had very low blood pressure, so her blood pressure was actually high, but they didn't catch it. And so that Thursday morning, I was kind of thinking about maybe I should go to seminary to Orlando, and all of a sudden she vomited. So I called the hospital and said, I called the doctor and they said, go to the emergency room. And then they actually told me, don't go to the emergency room, go straight to the OB delivery floor at the Cape Canaveral Hospital. And they're waiting for you. So I got her in the car and went, and they took her into the operating room. And Pastor Dave Aldridge was there with me, and my parents had showed up. And in about 4 or 5 minutes, they brought out little baby Drew. And he was about this big. I could hold him in one hand. And they whisked by me with him to go put him in the little incubator warmer thing, you know. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And so Dave and I were standing out in the area outside this door, outside the operating room, waiting for them to bring baby Cal out. And all of a sudden, they didn't come. And they didn't come. And they didn't come. And then a nurse came out and said, why don't you two go step in that room right over there? Well, I'd been in the hospital enough to know what this meant. So they took me over to the room, and they came in and told us that baby Cal had not made it. And devastated, of course. And they brought baby Cal to us, and Pastor Dave baptized him out with water from a little styrofoam cup. Then they came and said, we've taken your wife to ICU. And I didn't think, when they said it, I didn't think anything about it. Oh, she's just had this emergency C-section. We've got this horrible thing happen. You know, that's probably really. And so I said, okay, well, I'll go there in a couple minutes. And they said, no, you need to get there right now. So I got there, and Pam had developed. Well, she had preeclampsia, is what caused it. And then they found out that they told us that she had something called peripartum cardiomyopathy. So basically, the lower left ventricle of her heart was not pumping blood to her organs, and her heart was enlarging. She also had something called HELP syndrome, which meant her liver was failing. Because the blood wasn't going to her organs, her kidneys were failing. And, let's throw in a blood clot that had gone from the surgery spot to her heart that was going to possibly become a pulmonary embolism and kill her instantly. Well, I don't know, who here is from Merritt Island? I know a few of you are. Do we know each other? You look real familiar. I keep seeing you. We'll have to talk after. I don't know. But anyway.
Maybe.
Sorry.
Your father maybe at the Space Center.
Okay, and aside. But anyway, so Merritt Island news travels really fast. Pam had been a school teacher at Holy Trinity Episcopal School in Melbourne. I was a pastor in Georgiana. We had been involved in other churches. The hospital was now overrun with church people, ministers. If there was a ministerial crisis in Brevard County in that moment, it would have been trouble, because almost every minister was there, it seemed like. I had all kinds of minister friends came. And I got 2 opinions from doctors. One said, we're going to put a balloon pump in and see if we can save her. The other one said we need to put her on a helicopter to Shands for a heart transplant, but she'll probably die en route. So I said, she's going to die right here. So that afternoon, we had so many wonderful, wonderful people. And that's why I kind of put down here the church as the body of Christ, because people just came. And we made the decision to have her stay and to do that, to have this balloon pump put in. And I finally sent everybody home for a while. I said, look, we've got to clear out the hospital. The hospital can't handle all these people in the hallways. It's just not fair to all the other people, are here in ICU, and the waiting room was full. So it was just me and about 5 pastor friends sitting in the waiting room. And they said, look, she's stable right now. Why don't you? I said, you guys go and get something to eat down in the cafeteria and then bring me something back. And, I'll go in and sit with her for a while. So I went and sat with her. And as I was sitting with her, she had a pulmonary embolism and she basically died right in front of me. We called her cold blue, rushed me out of there, rushed me back into that waiting room in ICU. And a nurse brought a clipboard and said, which box do you want to check? I had no idea. I said, I want you to try to save her, but I don't want her to be on a vent the rest of her life. Check that box, check, go. I didn't know at the time, I've since found out, but they did CPR and paddles, and they got her back miraculously. And I found out later, we see that on TV happening all the time, but it rarely happens that people survive what she survived. Those pastors came rushing back and just surrounded me in prayer. My wife was sick for months and months and months and months and months. In and out of the hospital many, many times. We don't have to go through that story too much, but she, we had people staying at our house every night from our church and from other churches and from food and just crazy, crazy help for months. We were just so grateful. People, a different lady would come over every night, and I slept on baby Drew's floor and took care of him, and they would take care of Pam when she needed something in the middle of the night. It was just the body of Christ at work, wrapping their arms around us. One of my favorite stories at that time, after she started to pull through, was still sick for a long time, and she still has residual effects. Matter of fact, she'd love to be at something like this, but she takes a nap every day from 2 to 4 because of that event. All those years later, 25 years later. But we were having trouble. She was having trouble eating. She couldn't gain weight. She's lost a bunch of weight. Just looked horrible. And one of our neighbors was a fellow named Mike Gentili, who lived 2 or 3 or 4 houses down. And Mike Gentili is a plumber in Merritt Island, but he also owned Dairy Queen. And he stopped by just one day to say, hey, how's everything going? And I said, oh, Mike, she's doing okay, but she's just wasting away. Nothing tastes good. She can't eat. It's just horrible. About 30 minutes later, his wife Debbie showed up at our house with the biggest box of everything from Dairy Queen you could imagine. And the cool part about it, Pam didn't even want much of it, but Zach and I had a ball, right? We just, fortunately we had some other stuff, but Merritt Island community and community at large was so wonderful to us. And we made it through that difficult time with the love of God and the love of our community, and there's no way we would have survived it without. Let me talk about hospice for just a couple of minutes. After we left ministry, and after 6 years, long story. No need to go there. The basic really is that at that point I graduated seminary, and they wanted me to become ordained, which was the plan, but they wanted me to move sooner than we wanted to because Zach was still in high school. And I'm like, I can't do this. I need to stay local pastor for a few more years. No, you're ordained. You got to fit master's divinity. You got to get ordained. It was back and forth with the Methodist hierarchy, so we decided just to get on out and see what life would be. I became a school teacher and did lots of different things, but I had this heart for ministry, so I kept trying to be a pastor through different things. I started an organization called the Community Pastor, where I've done lots of weddings and many, many funerals and celebration of lives over the last 20-something years around Merritt Island. We started for a time, we had what we called church on the porch in our house. We had friends over who were kind of wayward and didn't have churches. That kind of had fallen away from the church for a variety of reasons, and they'd come over on Sunday morning and we'd have a Bible study together and just call it Church on the Porch. It was great fun and great ministry. One time at Grace, I went back to Grace Methodist and I was helping out the pastor who had a grandchild in another part of the state, and they would want to leave on Wednesday night and not come back till Sunday morning to preach, so I was kind of the part-time pastor there while they were gone. And I was also a school teacher at the time, and I also needed some extra money, and so it was summertime, and so the church needed a part-time custodian. So I said, well, I'll be the custodian part-time and then do the ministry stuff too. So they called me the pastodian. And my favorite story about that was there was this one luncheon. It was a ladies group from ladies from all over Brevard County, and they came to this fellowship hall, and I had to be there to do the prayer and be the pastor guy there, whatever. So I sat there with the ladies, had lunch, did the prayer, did a little talk or whatever. And then time to clean up. I went home, changed clothes, came back to clean up and to mop the floor, and a couple of ladies were still there. I'm wearing a ball cap and shorts and a t-shirt, and somebody goes, wait a minute, aren't you? I said, yeah, I am. I'm doing both jobs today. So that was a great ministry as well to do that. And I've filled a lot of pulpits around Brevard County and for other friends in seminaries over the years, just filling in, doing Sunday sermons. My favorite story, I was a Presbyterian church actually. My brother was a member of Rockledge Presbyterian, and this is when I was at Georgiana, and he thought it'd be a good idea. His pastor come over, the Presbyterian pastor come over and preach at Georgiana, and I go over and preach at the Presbyterian church. I said, that sounds great. So I go over there, and I'm leading all the worship, and so and so we get to the Lord's Prayer, and I'm doing the Lord's Prayer. And at one point in the Lord's Prayer, I realized it sounded like there was something not right. I couldn't quite figure it out, but I'm praying, I'm praying the Lord's Prayer, and just something didn't seem right. So church was over, I go to the back, I'm shaking hands, and the first guy in the room, he goes, Pastor, that was a really great sermon, but I just want to let you know, us Presbyterians, we're debtors, not trespassers. I was like, that's what the commotion was. Okay. But now I landed this job with Hospice of Health First, and I have truly found another calling in my life. I was a school teacher for many years and was not working at the time, and found applied for this job, and God granted me more grace and put me in a position to be a bereavement counselor for 2.5 years with Hospice of Health First. And then recently was promoted to manager and now oversee the bereavement team and the chaplains and the social workers and the volunteer coordinators. But in this time in bereavement, I just have been able to walk alongside so many different people in so many different ways to be with them in their grief journey. And we make lots of phone calls. And a little plug. We do bereavement services for anybody. You don't have to be a hospice person. We have support groups, and also we do one-on-one bereavement at no charge. For anybody who has grief issues, we're happy to meet with you, take care of you. Please spread that word. We do it as a courtesy to the community through our Health First Foundation and through other, just as part of what we do. So please let everybody know that. And I wanted to leave you today with just a couple of bereavement tips, if you will, to help you if you were ever bereaved or just in other parts of life. Because the things that we see there's 3 things that we typically see in bereavement that people go through, and frankly, all three of them can be parts of life without grief as well, but it's just really a lot about, anxiety and some different things that we go through. And there may be different kinds of grief. It's not just grieving a loss of a loved one. It could be a job or a moving or a whole bunch of different things that you might have grief. So the first one is, one of the first things that we see a lot with people is guilt. When someone's passing or has passed, a lot of times people feel like, what could I have done more? What could I have done? And so I do with them what I call the traffic circle metaphor. Okay? So I actually would like somebody, could you come up for a minute? I just want you to hold my microphone for me.
Okay.
Okay? I'm not going to put you on the spot except for that, because I need both hands. Okay? Okay. So the traffic circle metaphor works like this. So a lot of times if you're going through grief or anxiety or difficult times in your life, one of the things that can happen is you have trouble making decisions, you have trouble solving problems, you just feel way out of whack. And what I always like to tell my clients is that what is happening with you is physiological. It's not psychological, it's physiological. Our bodies and our brains get all out of whack when we are in grief. And so I like to use this metaphor of a traffic circle. I know enough clinically now to get me in trouble. And I actually did this yesterday at a presentation. There was a couple doctors in the room, and I was like, oh, Lord, I hope I'm saying the right thing. But anyway, so our brains, when our brains are in grief or in stress or in anxiety, our brains don't work as well. But let's just talk about what happens in our brains in a typical. If everything's going fine and you have a problem to solve or you have a decision to make, the idea goes into our brain. And I'm not going to talk about all the different parts of our brain, but basically this idea, this problem kind of goes around in different parts of our brain, and eventually after you figure everything out, there's an exit, like a traffic circle, that's reasoned thought. And you can make that decision. You get to the place, okay. And of course, as Christians, we believe there's some spiritual aspect of it as well, right? But when we are under stress from grief, anxiety, lots of things going on in our world, we have two things that happen to us, and guilt plays into this a lot. Because when we're guilty, when we have this guilt and grief, a lot of times it's because we really can't come up with a reasoned thought to realize that we did do everything we could do. We did make good decisions. We did do the best for our loved one that we could. Right? So, we get two things happen to us. We get brain fog. Has anybody ever had brain fog before? Can't think, can't make decisions, just feels foggy. And also we have this thing called ruminating thinking, where we think things. Laying in bed trying to get to sleep. Can't stop thinking. Wake up in the morning, first thing we're thinking, right? Okay? So here's what happens with our brain. Here's why we can't make good decisions. Those things go into our brain. It's foggy. And we're moving too fast. We can't get to the reason thought exit. It's a physiological thing. You're not going crazy. It's just that your brain's not letting you think too rationally right now. And a lot of time, that's the brain protecting. So what we tell our folks is, with time, with some other things that we can teach you, the thinking will slow down, the fog will lift, and you can start thinking rationally again, making decisions again. Okay? We try to do that to normalize that thought for people and to give them a little hope. Okay? That's number one for guilt. Thank you, Z. Secondly, anger. A lot of people, when they have someone in their life dies, there's anger. Sometimes it's anger at the medical system. We hear that a lot. Sometimes people are mad at the person who died. And that brings in some guilt too. Some people just have anger. And they don't even realize that it's happening. But they're in Publix in the 10-item line, and somebody's got 15 items, and they're really pissed off about it. So, excuse me, I probably shouldn't have said that. Sorry about that. So anger can really jump out of you in grief or when we're in anxiety and deep anxiety. So I'm going to teach you something new. This is a new breathing technique. I teach breathing techniques all the time. There's one called box breathing where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. This is a new one. It's called the physiological sigh. Have you heard of this one, Lauren? Okay, here's a new one. This is Stanford research. So what happens is, you're going to breathe in through your nose twice, really quickly, and then exhale for the count of 8. What happens is, when you breathe in through your nose first and then a second time, and believe me, I mentioned this in front of the doctors the other day too, and I'm not sure it's exactly right, but the carbon dioxide, with the second breath, the carbon dioxide opens up these extra areas in your lungs that immediately lower your heart rate. So this is Stanford research, not Charles Parker telling you this, okay? It's going to go like this. You just do that a couple times, and immediately the heart rate's going to go down. And when your heart rate goes down, you can feel your whole body calm a little bit, right? Okay? So if you get in moments, traffic, or if, a lot of times we'll have people who have what we call compassion fatigue. They've been taking care of a family member for a long, long time, and they're just beat down, and they're tired, and they get to a point to say, I just can't take it anymore. I can't do this anymore. We can start to teach them this kind of breathing just to get them off the ledge a little bit. Okay? So, physiological sigh. And 8 through your mouth. Okay? Another thing that I love to talk to people about too, and I didn't have this written down, but I'm going to say it anyway, is going outside. If you have anxiety, if you are, need some relief, go outside. First thing in the morning, when the sun's first coming up, get some sun on you in the first thing in the morning, and be barefoot in the grass. Okay? It's called grounding. The electrical charges in the ground match the electrical charges in your body and immediately calm you down. And if you don't have a place that you can be barefoot on the ground, then go outside and hug a tree. Touch a tree. Barney knew something when he said hug a tree. You remember Barney saying hug a tree? Touch a tree if you can't be barefoot. Touch something that's earth, and it will calm. It's a physiological thing that will calm you down. The third and final part, of course, that we see in grief, and what we call anticipatory grief, before somebody dies, if they've got a terminal disease, or after, is sadness. Overwhelming sadness. And when you lose somebody, it's a sadness unlike any you've ever had before. And there's this great grief expert that I follow named David Kessler. And he's got YouTube stuff, he's got books, he's got all. Matter of fact, do you remember Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? Anybody ever heard of her? She was a great grief expert in the 1970s. She wrote a book called On Death and Dying. That book was actually the 5 stages of grief she talked about, and how that was actually for people who were dying. But now Kessler wrote a book called On Grief and Grieving, and he takes those 5 stages of grief and talks about them in bereavement. But anyway, for the sadness of grief, he said something that's very profound but very simple. He said, the sadness of grief is like an unwanted house guest. It just shows up. You have no idea when it's going to hit you. You have no idea when it's going to show up. And the best thing to do is to honor it, pull up a chair by the fire with it, and just sit with the sadness until it decides to leave. But the good news is that over time, that unwanted house guest will come less frequently, and when it comes, it won't stay quite as long. Okay? So those are my little pitches for grief and our hospice program. We at Health First, Hospice of Health First, we have some great nurses, we have great doctors, we have great social workers, we have great chaplains, we got a great team. There's lots of great hospices in Brevard County. I'm not, I think ours is the best. As a matter of fact, up until, there's only been 2 hospices in history who've gotten 5-star rating in the people who rate hospices. And Hospice of Health First was the first to get it. And recently, and that was just for, because we're just here. So that was for Brevard County. St. Francis also recently got the 5 stars, but they're a more of a bigger brand than we are. I mean, as far as statewide stuff, even national, I think maybe. And we're really proud of that. So if you ever, God forbid, have to need hospice services. And one thing about hospice too that just want to mention that's a kind of something that people don't understand too often. Hospice is not just about the last week, end of life. Okay? To qualify for hospice, and I hope I'm saying this right, but your doctor will know that if you have a terminal disease that could kill you within 6 months, I think that's kind of the standard. You could die within 6 months if you have a terminal disease that you could die within 6 months. We've had people in service much longer than that because they haven't died in 6 months, but their disease could make them die within 6 months. And you can start hospice way early and have regular visits from nurses, regular visits from social workers, regular visits from case managers, regular visits from chaplains to help you along that journey and to help caregivers along that journey as well. So keep that in mind and spread that word, because sometimes people think I got to call hospice the last day or the last week. We can be there for you much longer. We also have palliative care as well, which is before hospice. If you've got an illness that you can need an extra nurse visit, some social work visits, certified nursing assistants, CNAs can come to your house. We have all kinds of things. Talk to your provider about these things if it's something that you feel like you or a family member needs. Okay? I'd just like to close with this. I have a personal theology that I've kind of lived with my whole life, or not my whole life, my whole new life since March 1st, 1994, really, that I just wanted to share with you. I learned this in seminary, and it's just the practicality of it, and then the purpose behind it is so beautiful. When we as Christians need to understand our world and help ourselves make good decisions every day that we want to live Christ-like. A seminary professor gave me this visual, and I've always loved it. It's a visual of a wind chime. So picture a wind chime. The middle part of the wind chime, the main part of it, is Scripture. That's the basis of what we base our lives on. And there's 3 things that go around it. There's tradition, which is whatever faith community you are involved in or you've grown up in. What are the traditions of that faith community? For us as Methodists, is John Wesley. John Wesley reached out to the poor in England. John Wesley reached out and stopped much alcoholism in England in the 1780s. John Wesley wrote many great sermons. That's what we base ours on. That's our tradition. And all different churches have different traditions in that way. So you got tradition, you got reason. We have to use reason thought. Does it make sense? Is our gut and our head aligned in what we're thinking? And then the third is experience. What personal experiences do you have that you can lend in as a Christian to this decision or this thought or the choices you have to make? And what my professor said was, when you have Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience all on this wind chime, and the wind of the Holy Spirit blows through, it will make beautiful music. Thank you all very much.